Hi friends, I'm Teacher Luke and welcome to this IELTS Writing Task 1 course. This course will help you if you're struggling with the academic Task 1 on the IELTS writing. Now, in this course, we have 6 lessons for you. Lesson 1 is all about different strategies you can use to boost your score according to the criteria. Lessons 2 to 5 are all about different structures you can use and vocabulary to help you get that band 7 or band 8. And then lesson 6, you can view lots and lots of band 8 sample answers. Overall, this course will be really helpful for you and it's free on YouTube, so I hope you enjoy it. If you want me to make more courses like this, write yes below in the comments and I'll make a task 2 course just like this. Okay then, well I hope this is helpful. Let's jump into lesson 1. I'll see you there. Hi friends, as an English language teacher, I've met a lot of students whose English is really good, but they still can't get a good score on IELTS writing. This is because in order to get a band 7 or above on IELTS writing, you need to know exactly what the examiners are looking for in your answers. And I can't express how important that is if you want to get a band 7 or above. So in this video, I'm going to give you a bunch of tips to help you score really high on IELTS Writing Task 1 by writing an answer that the examiners want to see. And all of these tips come from the scoring criteria for IELTS Writing Task 1, this scoring criteria here. Let's zoom into the higher bands because that's what we want to achieve. And if you look closely, you can see that there are 4 main categories you're being scored on. So now I'm going to go through each of these categories one by one and I'll show you some tips in order to score high for each category. Each category is equally important. The first category was task achievement. Task achievement basically refers to the quality of your answer. For writing task 1, we can think of it as, were you able to identify all the main features in your graph, diagram or map, and then write about them in a clear and organized way. Let's take a look at what the criteria says exactly, and then I'll show you some tips for this category. Let's take a look at what you need to do on task achievement to score a band 7. You need to clearly present and highlight the key features. If you do not do this, you will get a band 4. Band 4 states that the student does not cover all the key features. But what does this actually mean? How are you able to present the main features in your answer? Well, first thing you need to do is identify what the graph or map is actually about. And then, importantly and more difficultly, you need to find the most significant information. Basically, the most interesting and important information in the graph, and then write about that clearly. Of course, that's not an easy thing to do, especially if you're not familiar with graphs, which to be honest, most people are not. But it is important to do if you want to get a good score on this IELTS writing task. So let me show you how you can do that here now. So let's say this is our graph. The first question you need to ask yourself is, what is the graph showing? We have a couple key things to focus on. Firstly, the title, and then the 2 axes. Firstly, the title. In this example, it is oil production capacity. And then we have the 2 axes. They are millions of barrels per day and countries by decade. So those are the key features of this graph. Now you need to do something a bit more difficult, which is to identify the most significant or important information in this graph. You can do this by looking at overall trends in the graph, or you can do it by looking at the main differences between the items in the graph. Overall trends refers to the overall theme of the graph, and the main differences is where you can compare and contrast the different items in the graph. Let's go back to this example and try to identify the trends and important information. So what is the main trend here? Well, I think the main trend is an upward trend of oil production. In almost every country in this graph, the oil production increased, so we can say there's an upward trend. And what about the most significant or interesting information? Well, we might want to take a look at these 2 countries here and discuss contrast. Qatar on the left has showed almost no increase, whereas Saudi Arabia, the oil production has increased significantly. It's essential to write about all of those features. what the graph is about, what is the trend, and what is the significant information in the chart. But that's not all. Now you need to organize your answer in a special way. IELTS examiners are looking for all of these key features, but they also like them to be written in an organized manner, which it does say in the criteria if we look here. So again, look at band 7. Point number 1 presents a clear overview of the main trends, differences, or stages. So you need to organize your answer in a logical way. And this is a sample structure I suggest. You have an introduction, an overview, detailed paragraph 1, and detailed paragraph 2. You do not need a conclusion for IELTS Writing Task 1. And here's a sample answer using that structure. You can pause this video to read if you want. So that's task relevance. Now let's take a look at cohesion and coherence, which is all about the structure and flow of your answer. The criteria has lots of information, but here is the most important part. To get a band 7, you need to logically organize your ideas and use cohesive devices. Basically, the flow of your answer. But what does this actually mean? Well, you need to organize your answer logically, usually from general to specific, and then you need to use linking words to link your sentences and ideas together. That's really important. If you want to get a good score, you need to do those two things well. Earlier, we talked about a structure. Now let's look at that structure in more detail, and I'll show you all the key points of it. So this is the sample answer I showed you earlier. Let's analyze it together now, looking for the key points based on cohesion and coherence. So paragraph 1, here you need to paraphrase the question and state what the graph is all about. And do this in just one sentence. You don't need to go into much detail. Just write one sentence about what the graph is showing generally. Paragraph 2. You provide a general overview of the trends in the graph. No numbers are needed here, and 1 or 2 sentences is usually enough. Paragraph 3 and 4 are all about the details. Here you go into specific information. So you go into detail about all the main features. Discuss numbers or percentages, and I suggest you do this in 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph can be the most important information, and the second paragraph can be the less important information. And you can use linking words like in contrast or despite throughout your answer. These linking words are also known as cohesive devices, and this is in the IELTS criteria that I showed you earlier. So use a few of these words in your answer. Okay, now let's move on to the next section, which is lexical resource, basically vocabulary, and this is what the criteria has to say about this category. You need to use a wide range of vocabulary accurately. IELTS examiners don't like it if you repeat the same words over and over again. You need to use a range of synonyms if possible to get a good score, a band 7 or above. And I think this is quite easy for you to do if you learn the words well. So let me show you some examples now. So let's take a look at this example. I have used the word increase 5 times. You don't want to do that. You want to use some synonyms for this word. For example, you might use the word increase once and then change to surged or climb, rise or peak. These are all synonyms for the word increase. So as you can see from this example, it is really important not to use the same word over and over again. It is very obvious for the IELTS examiner, and they will mark you down for doing that. If you want to learn a bunch of synonyms for different phrases for describing a graph, I made a whole video on that as well. There is a link below in the description. Study that and then write your answers in the comments and I'll check them for you. And lastly, we have grammatical range and accuracy. To get a band 7 or above, you need to produce frequent error-free sentences and use a variety of complex structures. Particularly on the IELTS exam, you need to use complex structures. On IELTS Writing Task 1, you should aim to get 2 or 3 of these structures in your answer. They're not easy to use, but also not that difficult if you learn how to do them well. So I'll show you how to use them. First, we'll take a look at how I use them in my sample answer, and then I'll teach you how to use these complex structures easily. So in my sample answer, I used 2 complex structures, one for each paragraph. The first one was, despite a slight increase in 2000, production in Qatar remained relatively steady at less than 1 million barrels per day. And in the second paragraph, the estimated figure for Iran in 1990 was 3 million barrels per day, compared with around 2 million barrels in the other three countries. Simply put, a complex structure links two ideas together, normally with a subordinating conjunction. A word like despite, even though, however. All of these grammar words I'm sure you know really well already. But even though you do know how to do this well, I'm sure, let's still practice together now. So here are some subordinating conjunctions, and these are our two ideas. Idea number one. There was a slight increase of oil production in Qatar in 2000. Idea 2. Production of oil remained steady at 1 million barrels per day. Now, it would be good to link these two ideas together, and we can using some of these subordinating conjunctions. Notice that these two sentences show contrast. A slight increase and remained steady. That is a contrast. So which of these subordinating conjunctions show contrast? Well, it's these ones here. Despite, even though, whereas, or while. We can take one of these subordinated conjunctions and link these two ideas together. For example, despite a slight increase in 2000, oil production in Qatar remained steady at less than 1 million barrels per day. So this lesson mostly covered graphs, but you also need to learn how to describe a map. Maps come up quite a lot on the IELTS Writing Task 1, and this video here will help you with maps. You'll learn a structure and lots of vocabulary for describing maps really well and getting your band 7 or above. I recommend you watch this video and I'll see you there. Bye. Hi friends, in this lesson I'm going to show you an effective 4-step structure you can use on your IELTS Writing Task 1. Learning a structure like this one is so helpful because you'll know how to organize your answer in a way that examiners like it to be. Okay, we will look at this structure in 1 second, but I want to say if you're new here, hi, I'm teacher Luke from EnglishTestReady.com. If you're looking for an IELTS tutor, that's the place to go. You can also find lessons from me on there as well. So this 4-step structure can work well for all of the different types of questions on Writing Task 1, but it does work particularly well for describing a graph. So in today's lesson, I'll go through this structure by describing a graph, and I'll show you how to use it effectively. And the graph we're going to describe together is this one here. So this is the graph we'll describe. It's all about the oil production capacity in these 6 countries from 1990 to 2010, so in a 20-year period. So this is a bar graph, and it's a very common question type on Task 1 and probably one of the easiest types of graphs to describe. So now you have to describe this graph. Remember, for IELTS Writing Task 1, you have to write at least 150 words, which is kind of a lot, but if you learn this structure, you will easily write more than 150 words. So let's take a look at step 1. Step 1 is simply to write an overview. So what is the graph showing? So let's analyze this chart. We should write about the oil production capacity from these 6 countries, and it's measured in millions of barrels per day. A simple opening for this graph could go like this. The bar chart illustrates the estimated amount of oil produced in 6 countries between 1990 and 2010, measured in millions of barrels per day. So as you can see, it mentioned those 2 points very clearly. Estimated amount of oil produced and measured in millions of barrels per day. I also talked about the 6 countries and between 1990 and 2010. This is a good opening because it mentions all of the key points in the bar chart and shows the examiner that you understand what the chart is all about. So step 1 is to give a general overview of all the key points in the graph and what it's generally about. You don't have to go into details right away, but you should look at all the information provided to you and then paraphrase that slightly. Let's look back at this now and I'll show you how I paraphrased. The first paraphrase was based on oil production capacity, and I wrote the estimated amount of oil produced. Next up, we have millions of barrels per day, and I wrote measured in millions of barrels per day. So step 1 is to talk about what the graph is showing and give a general overview. That's the easiest part, of course. Now let's look at step 2, which is to talk about the trends in the graph. Okay, so the first sentence, Overall, oil production tended to increase during this 20-year period. Is this true? Well, yes. If you look at all of the different countries, the oil production increased during the 20-year period. So the first sentence describes an overall trend in that graph. I did not talk about a particular country, just overall what is happening. Then I mentioned Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is an interesting country in this graph because it produces the most oil, and on top of that, the increase during the period was most significant. So I wrote, the figures for Saudi Arabia were significantly higher than in the other countries. And then we looked at Qatar. Qatar is also an interesting country here because its production was the lowest. So this is how you talk about overall trends. You want to look at what is happening in the graph, and then you can narrow down to one or two really important points. In this case, it was countries, so Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Saudi Arabia because it was increasing the most, and Qatar because it was increasing the least. And notice I did not mention any numbers here, nor did I talk about all of the information in the chart. I just talked about the overall trends and the trends of the most significant countries. So step 2 is an overview of the trends. Remember that you don't need to go into details or talk about numbers right away. Instead, leave your numbers for step 3, which I'll talk about now. Now, in step 3, you want to write about the most important details. So step 3 is where you go into detail, where you can talk about numbers and percentages. So what are the most important details in this chart? Well, again here, I would recommend you look at the two countries which are the most different. And they are obviously Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So now we want to go into details about these two countries. So let's look at Saudi Arabia first. I wrote, from 1990 to 2010, there was a significant increase in oil production in Saudi Arabia. In 1990, just over 8 million barrels per day were produced, and this increased rapidly, reaching a peak of just over 14 million barrels per day in 2010. So as you can see here, when I talked about Saudi Arabia, I actually mentioned numbers, how many barrels of oil they produced. And this is what you want to do in step 3. You want to go into details like this. But it's a good idea just to go into details about the important information in step 3. Usually the important information you mentioned in the trends in step 2. So for this example, it was Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So now let's take a look at Qatar. So I wrote, in contrast, the smallest producer was Qatar. Despite a slight increase in 2000, production in Qatar remained relatively steady at less than 1 million barrels per day. Again here, you can see that I went into details about the important information. Okay, that's step 3. Now let's do a quick review. So step 1, remember, was talking about what is in the graph, giving a general overview of what the graph is about. Step 2, the overall trends. So what is the change the graph is showing? You can also talk about the most important information. In this example, it was countries as well. But keep it general, just trends. You don't need to talk about numbers in step 2. And step 3 is where you go into details about the most important information. So in my opinion, those 3 steps are by far the most important. And you'll probably get about 150 words just by going through those 3 steps. But if you have time or you need to write more words, then step 4 is useful for you. So let's look at step 4 here. So step 4 is talking about extra details. So in this example, we can talk about some details from the other 4 countries since we haven't really talked about them at all yet. Again, here you should talk about numbers and be as specific as possible. Okay, so the 4 countries are Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE. The other countries saw a slight rise in oil production over the period. The estimated figure for Iran in 1990 was 3 million barrels per day, compared with around 2 million barrels in the other 3 countries. The amount of oil produced peaked in 2010 in Iran at over 4 million barrels, and at almost 4 million barrels in Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE. Okay, and here is the answer in full. In total, this was 189 words, so well above the 150 words mark. So that's a simple 4-step structure. Now you want to learn vocabulary you can use for task 1. I recommend you watch this video here for that. And I'll see you there. Bye. Hi friends, today we're going to talk about a really effective structure you can use for describing a map on your IELTS Writing Task 1. Now, from my experience as an IELTS tutor, a lot of students mostly prepare for describing a graph for this writing task. But maps do come up quite a lot on the IELTS Writing Task 1, so you really do need to know how to describe them well. In this lesson, we're going to go over a 4-step structure you can use for writing about a map, and I'm going to show you lots of phrases you can use for describing a map effectively. But before we start that, if you're new to this channel, hi, I'm teacher Luke from EnglishTestReady.com. If you're looking for an IELTS tutor, that's the website to go to. There you can find lessons from myself and lots of other qualified IELTS tutors. Anyway, back to this lesson. So like I mentioned, we're going to look at an effective 4-step structure for describing maps, and here are the 4 steps. Step 1 is to identify the main features. Step 2, to write an introduction. Step 3, an overview. And step 4, writing details. Each step is equally important, and I'll tell you why as we go through the video. So the first step is called identifying the main features, and this is so important because to get a good score for this writing question, you need to write about all of the main features. If you miss out some of the main features, then you will get a lower score for this writing question. So let me show you how to identify the main features now. Okay, so the first thing you've got to ask yourself is, what type of map is it? There might be different styles of maps. For example, this one here is a town. This one is very common. You might get an island, like this. You also might get a place, like a train station in this example, or a shopping mall, or a school, or a park, anything like that. Basically, the IELTS test can ask you to describe lots of different types of maps. So the first thing you've got to do is identify what is it they are asking you to describe. And the next thing you can do is to understand the question. And the questions are quite similar, but there are some important individual details in each question. Let me show you what I mean here. So this is what the question looks like on the IELTS test. The bottom paragraph is always the same. It says, summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. That is always the same, it will never change. However, the top part is what we need to focus on. This question says, the maps show changes that occurred at Pacific Railway Station between 1998 and now. So those 2 points are really important. You need to identify what the map is generally showing, and then you read the question and understand it. That's particularly important for writing your introduction, which we will cover later. But by looking at the map and reading the question, you'll know exactly what you've got to write about. And the next point is really important, is talking about the dates in the map. So what are the periods shown? This one is critical. So if you look here in this map, it says 1998 to now. So this point is critical because it will determine what tense you have to use when you're writing your answer. So in this example, it says from 1998 to now. So what tenses do you need to use? Well, you need to use the past tense for describing the 1998 map, and then the present tenses for the now map. In particular, the present perfect should be used a lot in this question because you're describing actions that happened in the past which are still present and affecting now. And this is when we use the present perfect. Some other maps might also show the future. In that case, of course, you need to use the future tenses. And now we need to look at what are the main differences and similarities in the maps. So you need to identify the main differences, and this will likely be the majority of your written answer. So let's take this map, for example, and there are 3 major differences. The platforms and supermarket on the left, the shops and restaurant in the middle, and then the ticket office in the bottom right. And to get a band 7 or above, you need to identify and write about all of these major differences. Also, the similarities as well. So what features have remained the same? That's another question you can ask yourself. Well, not much has remained the same in these 2 maps, apart from the main platforms in the top right of the screen. And these platforms are an important feature on the maps, so you should mention that they have remained the same. Okay, so that's step 1, it's identifying the main features, basically planning before you write. And you might now be asking, is it essential to do all this planning even before you begin writing? And the answer is yes, totally 100% essential, because on the IELTS criteria, it says you have to be able to identify the main points. Let me show you here. So this is the scoring criteria for writing task 1, and if we look over at task achievement on the left, at a band 7, which I guess most people want to achieve, it says here, clearly presents and highlights the key features. Whereas if you compare that to band 4, does not cover all of the key features. So to get a band 7, you need to be able to identify and write about all of the key features, and that's why the planning stage is so important. Even though 20 minutes for writing this answer is not that long, you should take your time with the planning. It will make sure that you cover all of the key features in your answer and easily write more than 150 words. But of course, once you've finished planning, it is time to start writing, and steps 2 to 4 help you with that. So steps 2 to 4 are all about writing. We have an introduction, an overview, and then details. The IELTS criteria is very clear, and it says that you should include all of these 3 sections in your answer. Examiners will look for each section: introduction, overview, and then detailed paragraphs. The criteria also says this, but I'll talk about that more later. So let's start with the introduction. The introduction for this task is actually really simple. You just have to paraphrase the question. So basically, you're looking at the question and you're going to answer this question. What do the maps show? And you only have to write 1 sentence for this. So that's quite easy. Let me show you an example. So let's use this map as an example. The question, as you remember, is, the maps show changes that occurred at Pacific Railway Station between 1998 and now. So this is the question we have to rewrite or paraphrase. And here's my example. The 2 maps show how Pacific Railway Station changed from 1998 to the present day. So as you can see, this was quite a simple sentence. I'm sure you can write one just the same as this. You just have to reword the question, but include the same main information. So in this case, it was the name of the railway station and the dates included in the maps. Most introductions for maps will be very similar to this. So that's the introduction. Now step 3 is to write a general overview. And a lot of students ask me, do you need to write an overview for maps? Now, of course, for graphs and tables, writing an overview is very clear, but for maps, it can be a little bit vague. But the answer is yes, you do need to write an overview. If you look on the scoring criteria again, it says clearly, if you want to get a band 7 or above, that the student presents a clear overview of the main trends, differences, or stages. So even for describing a map, it is really important that you write a good overview. And I suggest you do it right after your introduction. It doesn't need to be long, 1 or 2 sentences is fine, but it needs to identify the general trends in the map. And here are some things you can consider for your overview. The first point, what are the major changes? You don't need to go into details just yet, but you do need to describe the major changes. For example, did something expand or grow, or did it shrink? Are there more buildings, more parks? And what's the purpose of the changes? These are some things you can consider. 1 or 2 sentences is enough. And you can use some phrases to signal to the examiner that you're writing an overview. For example, in general, generally, overall, by and large, on the whole. These phrases signal that you're writing an overview. Here's my example. Overall, we can see that the station has been expanded, with significantly more facilities available to customers now compared to 1998. So what's the overview in this example? Well, the station expanded to allow more facilities for customers. That's it. You don't need to go into more details yet. That is the overview of the general trend in this map. This was just 1 sentence, and that's totally fine. And did you notice the tense I used in this answer? Let's take a look again. Okay, so what tense did I use? Well, of course, it was the present perfect. So this map we're describing now has a past and present date. So because of that, we want to use the present perfect to describe the changes. So the introduction and overview has been written, and you did a good job. Now we're going to look at the details, which are of course the most important paragraphs. To get over 150 words, you're probably going to need to write 2 paragraphs. And of course, you're going to need to go into details explaining carefully all of the main features. Let me show you how to do that now. So like I mentioned, you're going to need to write 1 or 2 paragraphs, most probably 2 to get over that 150 word mark. For this example today, in the first paragraph, I'm going to write about things that haven't changed. And then in the second paragraph, I'm going to write about all of the things that have changed. That's not the only way. You could talk about the major changes in paragraph 1 and then the less important ones in paragraph 2. But I think this is quite good for this particular map we're talking about today. And it's something for you to keep in mind. And the next point is really important. So it's very important you don't just label. You have to actually describe the main changes in detail. Okay, so to get a band 7 or above, you don't want to just label the differences. I mean, you don't want to just say, this has changed, this has changed, this has changed. Instead, you want to describe the changes in detail. And you use this by using descriptive language and language to show comparisons. There are lots of different phrases and words you can use for this, which will impress your examiner. Let me show you those now. So here are a bunch of useful phrases for describing a map. The first one is really important. It's called Prepositions of Place. We have phrases like at the top, in the corner, at the bottom, to the left, to the right, underneath, beneath, below. And also different phrases like in the background or in the foreground, in front of, directly opposite, exactly in the middle of. Lots and lots of phrases you can use to describe the location of things. Those phrases are so helpful for describing the location of things in the map. And this is what the examiner wants to see. They want to see your answers in detail. And using these phrases is a great way to describe the location of things in your map. There are also other phrases we can use. Comparison phrases, like compared to, as opposed to, in comparison with, X was replaced by Y. In contrast to X, Y is. When comparing X and Y, we can see that. In this maps task, you do actually have to compare one map to the other and show the changes. Using phrases like this is a great way to do that. And when describing a map, oftentimes you're going to talk about buildings, new ones being built or old ones replaced. And you don't want to use the same words over and over again. Examiners hate that. So here are some different phrases you can use for buildings being built or replaced. So these verbs are used to describe building changes. Of course, we have build, like 3 new hospitals were built. We have construct, extend, expand, also remove. As you know, in the IELTS exam, it is important to use a range of vocabulary, and examiners love that. All of these phrases will definitely help you get a better score for your vocabulary section on this writing task. So considering all of those key points I talked about for the detailed paragraphs, let me now show you a good sample answer. Even though the station has undergone massive renovations since 1998, a couple key features remain the same or have only slightly changed. Importantly, the 4 original platforms are in the exact same position in the top left of the station, with the ticket office behind them. The ticket office is in the same location but has been extended. Moreover, the cafe has remained directly behind the platforms. So this paragraph is talking about all the things that remain the same, and the second paragraph then talks about the things that have changed. The second map shows the number of platforms has almost doubled to 7 since 1998, where there used to be only 4 platforms. The 3 new platforms have been built to the left of the original ones. In addition, a supermarket has been built behind the new platforms on the bottom right of the map. Moreover, the toilets have been replaced by a restaurant with 2 shops next to it. These are all positioned in between the old and new platforms. And here's the answer in full. Use this as a sample and analyze it for your own IELTS preparation. Okay, and that's how you describe a map, but hold on, you also need to describe graphs in IELTS Task 1 as well, and this video here talks about a good structure you can use for that. I also give lots and lots of vocabulary to help you describe graphs really well. So I'll see you there. Bye. Hi friends, in this lesson we're going to look at how to write a good answer for IELTS Writing Task 1 describing a process diagram. I'm going to show you a great structure you can use, give you lots of good vocabulary, and show you a sample Band 9 answer. If you're taking the IELTS Academic test soon, this video is going to be so helpful for you. But very quickly before I begin, if you're new to this channel, hi, I'm teacher Luke from EnglishTestReady.com. If you're looking for an IELTS tutor, that's the website to go to. There are so many qualified, expert IELTS teachers on that website waiting to teach you and help you pass your IELTS test. That's EnglishTestReady.com. Anyway, back to this lesson, we're going to look at how to describe the process diagram now. Here is a good 4-step plan you can use when planning and writing your answer. So this is the 4-step plan you can use for the process diagram. Firstly, you need to identify the main features. Then you write a short introduction, a short overview, and then you write your detailed paragraphs. Each of these steps are equally important, and if you do each one well, you will get a good score on this writing task. Step 1 is identifying the main features, basically planning, but this stage is so important. I do recommend you take your time with the planning stage, especially with the diagram question. If you plan well, you will be able to write a better answer, so let me show you how to plan well here. So here are some things you need to think about when identifying the main features. The first point is, what is the process diagram showing? Now on the IELTS Writing Task 1, there can be many different types of process diagrams. For example, how bees produce honey, how to generate electricity from the sea, or the fish pie production line. By looking at the diagram and reading the instructions, you will get an idea about what the process diagram is showing. It's really hard to prepare exactly for this question type because there are many different diagrams you can get. It will be good to practice writing lots of different ones to get used to it, but it's really hard to prepare it for an exact diagram. There are just too many options on the IELTS test. The next thing you want to do is count how many steps or stages are in the diagram. Now, steps and stages might be a little bit different. I consider steps to be smaller parts of a process and stages to be large stages in the process cycle. Think of stages more like categories or something like that. And like I said, I do recommend you actually count these before you begin writing because you'll probably write the number of the stages either in your general overview or in your detailed paragraphs. Let's have a look here. So let's take a look at this example of the honeybees. As you can see, there are actually 7 steps and they are numbered in this example, which is nice, but they might not always be numbered. Now, this is what I mean by stages. In this example, this diagram has 2 clear stages, stage A and stage B. There's no steps here like step 1, 2, 3. There are different stages in the process. Okay, so far so good. We've identified what the process diagram is showing and how many steps or stages there are. Now it's important to look at the end result. Of course, the end result is important to mention in your writing, so identifying that early and how the process ends up that way is really important. Different diagrams, of course, have different end results, but being able to identify that quickly is a good thing to do. There are lots of examples, but let's take a look at one to show you what I'm talking about. So here's an example from earlier. What do you think the end result is? Well, the end result is the electricity that's being produced in both stages. This is an easy example. The end result, of course, is number 7, the last number, and it is the honey that has been produced. Okay, a quick recap on the planning stage. You want to identify what the process diagram is showing, looking at the question and the diagram together. Then you want to take a look at the different steps or stages in the diagram, and of course identify the final outcome or the end result. For IELTS Writing Task 1, you have 20 minutes to complete the whole task, and I recommend you do spend a few minutes on the planning because it will help you so much when you are actually writing your answer. Not only will it help you to write your answer, but it will help you to get a better score. Because if you take a look at the IELTS scoring criteria, to get a band 7, you need to clearly present and highlight the key features. And it's very difficult to write about all of the key features and get a band 7 if you don't do your planning well enough. So make sure you spend a good few minutes on planning. But of course, after you've planned, you need to write, and those are steps 2, 3, and 4. Your introduction, overview, and detailed paragraphs. And each step, the introduction, overview, and detailed paragraphs, are all essential to get a good score on this writing task. I'll show you why by looking at the scoring criteria later in this video, but for now, let's start by looking at the introduction and how you can write a good introduction sentence. Yes, I said sentence, not paragraph. One sentence is enough for the introduction on this writing task. And it's not that difficult. Let me show you how to do it easily now. So for the introduction, you're basically answering this question. What does the diagram show? You can answer this question by paraphrasing the question you're given. And I think it's relatively simple. Let's take this process as an example. What is the question? Well, the question is, the pictures below show how tea is produced. They also illustrate the process of making a cup of tea. So as you can see right away, there are two stages in this writing question. And for this question, we're lucky on the IELTS test, they actually split it up into two sentences to help us identify the stages easily. Anyway, back to the introduction. So your job now is to paraphrase these questions. This is what I wrote. These images demonstrate how tea is produced and how a cup of tea is made. So that's it, a very simple introduction. One sentence is enough. To paraphrase, you can change some words around. For example, illustrate to demonstrate or illustrate to show. And in this example, the question had two sentences, so I joined them together. Simple. The introduction for this task is quite easy. And after you've done an introduction, you need to write a general overview. And that's really important. It's even in the scoring criteria. If you look here, to get a band 7 or above, you need to present a clear overview of the main trends, differences, or stages. So of course, if that's in the criteria, then writing an overview is really important, especially if you want to get a band 7 or above, which I think most of you do. Writing an overview for a graph or table is pretty easy, but for a diagram, it can be a little bit confusing. But I have a few tips to help you. Let's take a look at those now. So when you're writing an overview, you want to give a general description of the process. So just like the introduction, one sentence is enough for this part. If you can write two, of course go ahead, but one is enough. You don't need to go into detail. And I think it's a good thing to help the examiner know you're writing an overview by using different phrases which signal an overview. For example, in general, generally, overall, by and large, on the whole, these types of phrases. And this is what I wrote. Overall, there are 18 steps in the diagram, from sowing the tea seeds in India and China to enjoying a cup of tea at home. So that's my simple overview. I mentioned how many steps there are, 18 in total, and I talked about the beginning of the process and the end of the process. That's something you can think about doing if you get this type of process diagram on your IELTS Writing Task 1. So we've written the introduction and overview, and so far we've only written two sentences, which is fine. Now let's go into the most important parts of this task, which is of course writing about the details. For this, you should write at least one full paragraph, but I strongly recommend you write two if you can, and go into as much detail as possible. This is not easy, but it is essential to get a good score. Let's take a look at how you can do that now. So like I mentioned, you want to write one or two paragraphs, ideally two. The main topic of your paragraph will depend on what the process diagram is. But for this diagram, I'm going to split my paragraphs into the first paragraph describing the production, so how the tea was made and delivered to the supermarket. And the second paragraph is going to describe the consumption, how the tea was bought, made, and drunk. Of course, how you organize your paragraphs will depend greatly on what your process diagram is on the test. But try to make sure that each paragraph has a main feature you are describing. This will make it easier for your examiner to read and understand your paragraphs. Okay, there are some more tips. It's important that you don't just label. Don't just say what's in the process diagram. Instead, try to describe the process in detail. And a good way to do this is to use sequencing vocabulary. Here are a bunch of phrases you can use to help you sequence your answer well. We have some phrases for the first stage, the middle stages, and the last stage. IELTS examiners really want you to use a range of vocabulary, so try to use different sequences throughout your answer. Don't repeat the same words over and over again. Examiners don't like that and they will give you a lower score if you do that. Okay, let me show you how I've used these sequences and describe the details of this diagram in these two paragraphs. The first step is that the tea seeds are sown and then the sun shines, which causes the seeds to grow into plants. Once the plants have grown sufficiently, the leaves are picked by the farmers and put into baskets. After the picking stage, the tea leaves are spread out in the sun to be dried. The tea leaves are then packed into boxes, loaded onto lorries, and delivered to the supermarkets. In order to make a cup of tea, you first need to buy a box of tea from the supermarket. Next, you fill a kettle with water and put it on the stove to boil. Meanwhile, you put a tea bag in a cup, and once the kettle has boiled, the water is poured into the cup. Having been left in the cup for 2 minutes, the tea bag should then be removed. At this point, milk and sugar can be added. The final step is to drink a nice cup of hot tea. And here's the answer in full. Okay, as you know, on the IELTS Writing Task 1, you might also have to describe a map, and this video here will help you do that. We talk about the different structure of writing about a map, and I give you lots of useful vocabulary you can use to describe a map really well. So if you need help with maps, this video here is the one for you, and I'll see you there. Take care. Hi friends, in this lesson we're going to talk about different vocabulary you can use on IELTS Task 1 to boost your score. The vocabulary in this video in particular will be helpful for describing a graph, which is really common on IELTS Writing Task 1. When you're describing a graph, you need to identify trends and then describe them using a wide range of vocabulary. So if you want to get a really good score on this question type, you need to use lots of different words to talk about basically the same thing. In this lesson, I'm going to show you some sophisticated words for describing things that go up, go down, stay the same, or fluctuate. All of which will be so helpful to help you get a better score on your IELTS Writing Task 1. Okay, we will start in 1 second, but I want to say if you're new to this channel, hi, I'm teacher Luke from EnglishTestReady.com. If you're looking for a good IELTS tutor, that's the website to go to. You can find lessons from myself, plus lots of other tutors on there. Okay, anyway, back to this lesson. We'll begin now by looking at some different words you can use on your IELTS Writing Task 1, and we'll use this graph here as an example graph. And as you can see, this type of graph shows a lot of things going up, going down, staying the same, and being unpredictable. Again, very common on the IELTS test. And this graph shows data on 3 different bakeries and their yearly income. So this is what we need to describe. Okay, so that's our chart. Let's now think of words we can use to describe an upward trend when something goes up. The most basic way we can say, it went up. Remember, we often use the past tense for describing data. But some more sophisticated words could be to increase, or the noun form, unincrease. To rise, a rise. To improve, an improvement. To climb, a climb. To jump, a jump. To peak, a peak. So that was a bunch of sophisticated words you can use to describe an upward trend. They basically mean the same thing. Remember, on the test, if you're describing more than one upward trend, you want to use a variety of words. So my suggestion is that you get very comfortable with at least 3 of these, so when you take the test, you can use them easily in your answer. So let's check them out in some examples. Yearly income at Robbie's Bakery jumped significantly from 2006 to 2008. Robbie's Bakery saw an increase in income from 2006 to 2008. Yearly income improved greatly at Robbie's Bakery from £60,000 in 2006 to just under £100,000 in 2008. As you can see, those phrases are quite easy to use when describing an upward trend, and I recommend, like I mentioned, you use a variety of them in your test. Also, use a variety of verbs and nouns to describe the trend. Examiners would love that. Okay, now let's move on and look at downward trends. So rather than writing it went down, you could write to decrease, in the noun form, a decrease. To fall, a fall. To decline, a decline. To drop, a drop. Or to plummet. So the words like to decline or to drop have a very neutral meaning, but if you want to describe something that's really serious, you could use to plummet. Use stronger words like to plummet to describe more serious results. And as I mentioned earlier, again, I recommend you memorize and practice using at least 3 of these, so when you take the test, you can use a variety of phrases to describe a downward movement. And here they are in some more sentences. Lovely Loave's income declined rapidly from around 90,000 in 2004 to just over 40,000 in 2008. Lovely Loaves experienced a significant drop in yearly income from 2004 to 2008. Yearly income at Lovely Loaves plummeted in the years following 2004. On the IELTS test, when you get given a graph, especially a line graph like this, there's often lots of different points you can talk about. There'll be some upward trends, some downward trends, and some trends which are unpredictable. So you have to be able to write about all of these different trends. And here are some different phrases you can use when something is unpredictable like this. As you can see at the start of this graph, Lovely Loave's income was unpredictable. There are not as many synonyms for this trend, but here are a few good ones you can use. To fluctuate, in the noun form, a fluctuation. To vary, or a variation. In some sentences, Lovely Loave's yearly income fluctuated from 2000 to 2004. Lovely Loave's yearly income varied from 2000 to 2004. Lovely Loave's income experienced a period of fluctuation from 2000 to 2004. That last example is something examiners would love. When you want to talk about an amount of time, you can say a period of plus a noun. So a period of fluctuation or a period of variation. That's a great way to describe a certain amount of time. Okay, so far we've looked at upward trends, downward trends, fluctuations. Now let's take a look when nothing happens, when things stay very, very steady. You can say remain the same, to remain static, to remain unchanged. Or you could say to stabilize. If something has stabilized, it means in the past it was not flat, it was not steady. It could have had a big upswing, downswing, or been very unpredictable, but now it's stable. So only use to stabilize if that's the case. But the rest are just used to describe little or no change. And again, in some examples, Bernie's Bun's yearly income remained static from 2003 to 2006. Bernie's Bun's yearly income went through a period of stability from 2003 to 2006. So using words like these will improve your score, but that's not all. You now need to learn a structure, and this video here will help you with that. Learning a structure like this will help you organize your answer and get a better score overall on the IELTS Writing Task 1. So I'll see you there. Hi friends, I'm teacher Luke from EnglishTestReady.com, and in this lesson I'm going to show you 21 sample Band 9 answers for IELTS Writing Task 1. So just a quick reminder, on the IELTS test for Task 1, you have 20 minutes to write your response. But of course, in this practice video, I'm not going to give you 20 minutes. Instead, I'll show a graph for 10 seconds, and then I'll show the sample answer right after for about 30 seconds. If you want to practice writing your own answer, I recommend you pause the video for 20 seconds and write your answers below in the comments. If you do that, I'll check some of them for you and give you some feedback. Okay, that's enough from me. Let's get started with these sample questions and answers. Good luck, and if you want more like this, write yes below in the comments. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Now I recommend you watch this video here to learn a 4-part structure for answering IELTS Task 1.